Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 41 of Uncovered. I am Behram Kazi. You can find me on Twitter at DefMango, and with me is Jarrod Kimber. You can find him anywhere and everywhere. He is literally everywhere. But lots on our itinerary today. We'll start off with the Ashes. So we now know the team that England has announced for Old Trafford. Jarrod, no surprises with Jimmy Anderson coming back for Ollie Robinson. Of course, it's his home ground, Old Trafford. Averages 22 with the ball over here as well. And you'd have to say that it kind of made sense. If you had to try him somewhere, you'd probably try him at Old Trafford, right?
Yeah, I mean, are we getting to the end of Jimmy? I know someone asked him that question recently and he was very upset that it was asked again. But we have to feel like we're getting to the end, right? That this is slowly, maybe slower than any other player we've ever seen, but we're getting to that period. Not giving him the Old Trafford test for, let's say, I mean, Robertson could have played, but Tongue is the one I probably would have picked.
Uh-huh.
When you look at that, I think you would get to the point where you would have to suggest that if he didn't play that, then that's England basically saying that he's finished. And they're probably not ready to say that, right? Like that's a big call, even in the middle of an important Ashes. That's a very big call to make. I did actually have a look. I just finished a piece on Scott Boland and his control percentage, as in how often the batters are actually in control of the balls that he's bowling, is quite bad. So in Scott Boland's case, Scott Boland is producing mistakes. They're just not going to hand. They're, England are mitigating the mistakes and everything else. Jimmy's case, I'd have to say he's not creating as many mistakes as he usually would. That would be my biggest concern, I think, if I was England at the moment. On top of that, this pitch can sometimes be quite flat, it helps spinners and everything else. He's already complained once in this series about those kinds of wickets. I thought it was interesting. I thought that it was what they were going to do. But if they were truly Baz bowling, I wonder if that is when they just go, well, Tongue's bowling better than you, Jimmy. Have another week off and let's see what happens in the last test. But apparently they don't feel that way.
Yeah, they definitely do not. And I think this test pretty much will define whether we are towards the end of Jimmy Anderson or do we have like one more season of him. I don't know. I personally would love to see him go ahead of Warney because I just want a fast bowler in there in the 700 wickets column. But yeah, that's just some bias because I'm a big Jimmy fan. I objectively do not think that if he continues to bowl like this, England should persist with him. Another very key sort of thing that we see in England's lineup. We saw it in the final innings at Headingley. But Moeen Ali has been slotted in as the one down batter. And at number 3, I believe he has some runs in county cricket, but not for the national team. He hasn't done well for the national team over there at all. I think he averages like nearly half of what he averages down below the order. But then maybe that's a trade-off that England are willing to accept because it allows Harry Brook to bat in his preferred position. And Stokes, we were talking about how he could potentially come at 3. He also sticks at like 6 or 7 and lower down in the order. So what's your whole assessment of that batting order?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting move because we saw them do it in that chase, right? And I think a lot of us thought probably might be right hand, left hand. They talked about wanting to play it like white ball cricket. He quite often bats up the order in white ball cricket. There's a few people who said, well, he's doing it to take the pressure off Harry Brook. And I was like, well, Harry Brook only did it once, right? And perhaps that was enough. Maybe Harry Brook said to them, I can't bat at 3. It's just not something I have. Moeen is a top order player. Like in Test cricket, he's probably not quite, he's probably a below replacement level player, or maybe at the very best, a replacement level talent with the bat. His average is worse than that because he's batted everywhere in the order. He's had a ridiculous run where he's played in every different position. So his average probably looks a little bit worse than that. But he is traditionally a top order player. And I think he has always struggled with the idea of batting 6, 7, even 8. Because, and I know this, he's talked about the fact that psychologically, he feels when he bats at 7 or 8, he bats like a 7 or 8. Whereas when he bats at number 3, he bats like Moeen Ali because he was the kid who always batted at number 3 up until he started bowling good, which was when he was 23 or 24, right? He's not like other players who would slide up and down the order and all those sorts of things. So I think from that perspective, it makes a lot more sense. Having seen him bat at the top of the order, though, he's not match fit, right? You're not throwing Worcestershire's Moeen Ali, who's just come off, 1,500 runs in a county season in to bat at number 3, are you? You're throwing in a bloke who's retired from Test cricket, who you brought back on a Hail Mary to begin with. I don't expect it to do that well. But the interesting thing for me is that this goes back to the old plan, which was throwing Chris Wokes in at number 3 because England didn't have a number 3. So you might as well just use one of the many all-rounders that you have. I know there's big talk of Sam Curran. Sam Curran, I think, used to bat at, I want to say 5 or 6 for Surrey at a certain point, and he was asking about it 3 and 4, right? Because he wanted to improve his batting as well. Chris Wokes, I don't know if Chris Wokes has ever made that call from Warwickshire directly, but I think Chris Wokes has also said at times, I'd like to bat up the order. If I could do that, maybe I can do it for England. It hasn't quite worked. None of these guys are actually that good with the bat. Moeen Ali's the best of those 3 that I've just mentioned, but they all have flaws within their game. However, if it's going to get more out of Harry Brook, so you do have to juggle these things, right? If Harry Brook goes back down to number 5, and let's say at number 5 he can average 45 or 50, and number 3 is averaging 30 or 35, and Moeen Ali's only going to average 25 at number 7, there is an argument that says that it's not making that much of a difference overall. And I do understand that. I just think that it puts a lot of pressure on Joe Root, who's basically batting at number 3 probably at least once in this test match, maybe twice. So if Australia does take one of the openers early, chances are Moeen won't last very long, at least in one of those innings. And that means that Joe Root is batting at number 3 again. And the whole idea of batting Moeen Ali at number 3 is so that Joe Root isn't at number 3. So it's a bit of, this is the sort of thing that analysts talk about a lot. And you can see that this happens in, I think you and I might have been talking about this recently, where you have long test series, right? At a certain point in a long test series, you get to the point where it's not about the best players playing. It's about the players that you can get the most out of. And that might mean that you end up with Irfan Pathan opening the batting, right?
Yeah.
It might end up being that your third seamer is, Scott Styrus or whatever that, well, not that would ever happen in New Zealand because they never played in series long enough. But whatever that sort of weird thing is, or you've got a wicketkeeper who's a specialist bat, but you don't really want to ruin your batting lineup, so you don't want to bring in another proper wicketkeeper. Whatever that may be, we see Joe Root playing as a spinner, all these sorts of things. They happen in long series sometimes because you really, at this point, it's about scheming for the opposition, right? And they think that they're going to get more out of an 11 with Moeen Ali in the top 7. And this also comes back to the thing that you and I talked about right before this series, which is that Ben Stokes is no longer an all-rounder. And so in order for them to have 5 bowling options, Moeen Ali does actually have to bat in the top 7. And perhaps even higher than that would be, more helpful. This allows Bairstow to go back to number 7. So now they have Bairstow coming in at number 7. That's quite a powerful lineup with Wokes behind him as well. I get it. It's just, this is what old school test cricket used to be. You look at some of the old 11s, in those long series, like a Pakistan West Indies series, and you're just like, wait, why is this guy batting at number 3? And it's because during that point of the series, they were like, actually, what we need to do is get this out of our team. We're not picking our most normal 11 anymore. We're picking the 11 we think that will match up best against the opposition. And I can understand that. I just don't think, if Moeen Ali makes 60 runs combined total in this test match, for me, that would be a plus from this position, considering everything.
That would be an absolute plus. I would even take 50 or maybe 45 if he makes that many. And what I'm interested to see is that how does he go about his innings? Does he come and play the same sort of flamboyant cricket? Does he baseball his way through? Does he treat this position as a low value wicket? Is that how Moeen Ali will treat this? That's what I'm looking forward to. But I like the move because I would much rather have Harry Brook down the order. And I mean, Moeen will be happy that Nathan Lyon isn't part of the series anymore because, we all talk about Broad versus Warner, but people often forget about Moeen versus Nathan Lyon, and that's quite a terrible record. I mean, I can't come up with a better adjective, but he hasn't fared well versus Lyon at all. One final thought on the men's Ashes before we move on to the women's Ashes. Bairstow is keeping again. A lot of critics are out with their pitchforks. They really wanted Ben Foakes to play, and it's been a recurring theme as far as, discourse is concerned with respect to this Ashes. How many is he dropping?
the thing with Bairstow and Foakes is that if you had Foakes in this team at number 7 and Wokes at 8, you go, oh, that's decent. It looks so much better with Bairstow at 7 and Foakes at 8. And there's a lot of people who come out with the stats going, well, Foakes averages 38. There's hard 38s and there's soft 38s, right? The best way of explaining that is this player going to average 38 by getting a bunch of Tim Payne type scores, right? Scores between 20 and 60, which are very helpful, but don't usually end up winning you matches. Bairstow can make 150 batting at number 7, right? It's a very, very, and not just 150. It might be a run a ball, right? The difference there, and I know people say, well, we're not saying drop Bairstow, which is also fine, but you have to drop someone, right? So is it Moeen Ali? Is it Harry Brook? Like who are you leaving out of that side in order to get folks in? If Stokes was fully fit and could bowl, I do think that changes everything. And I think then at that stage, you're making a conversation where, folks probably has to come in. But at this stage, I don't think they're in that situation at all. So I've got no issue with it happening. Having said that, I think that folks is, if I was picking the team from scratch, I'd probably start with folks and work it out from there. But I understand why they haven't come to that point. They made a gamble at the start of this summer, wasn't it? It was before, it was the Island Test where they started. So they made a gamble at that point and they're backing it. I don't think on the back of 3 tests, it's worth saying that Bairstow hasn't particularly, made a lot of runs, because he could make 200 runs in this test match and, probably folks is not going to be able to do that. But your original question is how many drops? And that's the thing, is they made a gamble, and I think they made that gamble with limited knowledge. I don't think they had gone and watched Bairstow do a lot of wicket keeping in first-class cricket to see if he had healed properly. They probably just assumed he had. They might have even talked to someone. They have a lot of scouts in English cricket. My guess is if they sent, and I'm trying to think who their wicket-keeping scouts are. It might be Bruce French. Oh God, there's another one as well that I forgot. I've forgotten his name. But there's a couple of guys, Rhodes, perhaps. It might have been one of the other ones they used to send out. I'd be shocked if those guys went and saw Bairstow and went, yeah, he's fine, because he doesn't look fine. His feet aren't moving correctly. And if they did do that, and then they sent that information back to the ECB and Baz went, oh, I don't care. His batting's so good, it's worth it. Then they deserve to be in this position, right?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think that's a very, very valid point you bring up, that pre-injury Bairstow and post-injury Bairstow are two different beasts altogether. You can see that his fitness isn't as good as it used to be, and it's really coming to the fore. And for England's sake, I hope he holds on to all of those catches. But anyway, let's move on to the women's Ashes. Last time we spoke on the Uncovered podcast, Jarrod, Australia were 6-4 up because they won the test, and then they lost the T20 series 2-1. And that was quite big for England, because here they were with a chance of actually winning the women's Ashes if they went on to whitewash Australia. Now, 2 ODIs in, they nearly made that a possibility. In the first ODI, England made a record chase. They had never chased down a score of 264. They did that, and they almost broke their record 2 games in a row, because Australia posted, 283, I believe, in the second one, something in and around over there. And they were 3 runs short. My heart goes out to Nat Sciver-Brunt, of course. You can all feel a bit sorry for her, because she was unbeaten on 111. And I think they needed 18 in that last over, and they got 15. So you have to feel for her. But another person, or another cricketer who really, really won this game for Australia was Georgia Wareham. She scored, 26 runs in that last over? 37 of 14 deliveries. That is unheard of. That is belligerent hitting. So yeah, your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I think at a certain point, I don't know if it matters that England are probably going to lose this Ashes. It does to England women's cricket fans.
Well, they've already
and the
lost the urn, right? Australia's already retained.
Australia's retained it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's obviously huge for England cricket fans and anyone supporting this team. But I think the bigger issue here, well, not the bigger issue, but the bigger takeaway from this series, if especially on a podcast like this where people are listening around the world, is the Australian team no longer looks unbeatable. Right. And I think
15 ODIs, right? They were 15 ODIs unbeaten, and then they lost to England, and they nearly lost again in the second one. So that is actually a massive takeaway.
And they lost the T20s, right? So that's across 2 formats now. That the white ball team, and even in the test match, I know they ended up, I sort of cruising a little bit, but there were times in the test match where I thought they're not that much better than England, in a way that 2 years ago, that would have been a ludicrous statement, right? So suddenly they do look a lot better as a team. And this might just be that England have got better because they've started to professionalize. They're, looking at copying the Australian model and everything else. Maybe we're seeing the impact of that coming through. I don't know. But what I do know is that right at the moment, this doesn't look like the Harlem Globetrotters, and that's what the Australian women's team was, right? Like you played them and you lost, right? And if you did win, it was a one-off, right? And, a couple of things went wrong for them, and they still probably got close, but they couldn't get over the line. Whereas now you look at this and you're like, well, it's 5 white ball games, right? So over those 5 white ball games at the moment, England have won 3 and Australia have
Yeah.
won 2. No, have I got that
Yep.
wrong? Haven't I?
You're correct. You're correct. They
Yeah, that's right,
lost
isn't it?
2-1, and then it's 1-1 in the ODI series.
1-1 in the ODIs. Yeah. So you look at that and you go, well, wait a minute, that's not even one format of white ball cricket, right? It's 2 formats of white ball cricket. And England, even if Australia come back, they've already retained the Ashes. If they win the next game and they win the ODI series, we're all going to be looking at this going, wait a minute, has England caught up? Right. And that is a huge change from how we were looking at things for a long period of time. So for me, when I've been watching, and I've watched a little bit of the test match, T20s, I think was during the other test, so I didn't see as much. I've seen a bit of the one dayers. I don't see that discrepancy that I'm used to seeing, where you're just like, oh, okay. So I remember there were times during the last World Cup where I was like, they might have the first, second, and then third best leg spinners in the world. I think it was leg spin. I did a piece on it at the time. I can't remember. And you're just like, they don't even need to bring them all. Right? They're that far advanced than anyone else. And now you're starting to look at it, go, well, that's not quite the case anymore. The England players are stepping up to a certain point, but also the Australian team doesn't look quite as dominant. And if that's the case, I think there's I always think the narrative around one team being dominant is always wrong. We always go, oh, it's the worst thing possible for the sport. The same team wins every year. To casual fans, I think knowing who the best team is and how good they are is really, really good. When the Boston Celtics were winning the basketball, Manchester United, Collingwood Football Club, whichever, Australia, West Indies, all these different things. I actually think for casual fans, it's quite cool to go, oh, there's one team so much better than everyone else. And so we're going to learn a bit about them. But for the growth of the game, you really want England, South Africa, India, Pakistan, New Zealand, Thailand, Brazil, whoever it is. You really want all those teams to be thinking that there is at least a chance of something to play for. So, because they have to go back to their governments and they have to go back to their Olympic committees, maybe eventually. They have to go back to their sporting councils, all these different things and ask for money. If Australia has won like 83 straight games and your team is struggling to qualify, it's harder to get all that money. If Australia starts to slip and there's a couple of teams there and your team has a couple of decent results, these things do change, because the thing with women's cricket, where it's very different to men's cricket, is if the BCCI wanted to, they could be the best team in the world in 3 years' time without a shadow of a doubt. Right? They have the money, they have the facilities, they have the coaches, they have the women, they have everything they need to be able to do this. USA women's cricket could do a similar thing. And we saw that with Brazil, right? When Brazil looked at the results of the men and the women and they went, wait a minute, our women are much better than our men. We're just going to put all our money in our women. We've already seen that start to happen in other sports around the world as well. And once people work out that, someone tweeted this the other day. It might have been Depeche from Nepal, where he was saying that your investment in women's cricket comes back so much more. So if you were a cricket board of, let's say, Zimbabwe, right? And you say, we've got $5 million for the next year. If you were to spend 1 million of that on the women and 4 million on the men, you probably would see a huge change in the women's cricket, and the men's cricket probably would be roughly in the same spot.
Right.
I think with Australia slipping, you might see some boards go, okay, well, our men's team is okay, but, we've got no guns coming through and, they're already professional. Can we just chuck a bunch of money at the women here? Professionalize 30, 35 women, have them have the best facilities in the world, make sure that if you're 18, you get a contract, or 16 and you get a contract, all that sort of stuff. So from that perspective, Australia slipping even a little bit, I think, can change the way that boards and sponsors and everyone else looks at these sorts of things. And so it's interesting to me. I don't think we're about to see Australia not be the best team in the world over a long period of time, but we might have seen the end of the Harlem Globetrotters. If you don't know what the Harlem Globetrotters are,
I do.
I'm sure you do.
The basketball team, right?
Yeah. So they're a fake basketball team that never lost, right? Well, not a fake basketball team, but basically they were a stacked basketball team that went up against teams that they were supposed to lose against. That's what Australia was. They were that much better that you were only going there to be part of their highlight reel. And I don't feel that in the same way that I did a week and a half ago. And so that's an interesting change in women's cricket.
Yeah. What do you think may have been the reason behind Australia's, perceivable slide because look, they have all the top players in the world, and Elise Perry got runs. She got a 90 odd and 40. Beth Mooney got runs 80 and 34. Alyssa Healy has failed for a while now. I
Yeah.
think that
She's
might
had a
be a
weird,
big reason.
yeah, she's had a
Yeah.
weird one, hasn't she? Look, what if I
Even the
said to you,
spinners were really good, right? You mentioned
yeah,
leg spin, and Alana
yeah.
King is a sight for sore eyes. Love to watch her bowl. And also Ashley Gardner, she's having a really good tour. So would it just be like Alyssa Healy, or what other part you think might have Australia might have messed up on
What
this
if I
tour?
told you that Australia hadn't slipped?
They haven't slipped, so just England have gotten better.
I think that, look,
Hmm.
it's possible. I would have to go through every game to see if Australia is
Hmm.
playing worse. But as you said, from a casual look from away, and the bits of cricket I've seen, I
Hmm.
haven't been going, oh, Australia's not playing very good cricket at the moment.
Hmm.
They're still playing very, very good cricket.
Right.
For me, when I watch, it's that England seems to be playing slightly better cricket. And
Fair enough.
so when the England women got big or got good, professional, was when they
Hmm.
hired, I can't remember how many people was in the squad, but they professionalized about 15 or 18 women, right?
Hmm.
And that was a really good idea. And they had this big boost over Australia because suddenly these women were playing like professionals. The problem was after that if you're only picking from 15 or 18 people, how often does any international team over a 5-year period only pick from 15 to 18 people? So
Hmm.
anyone coming into that system is amateur. So they're already behind everyone else. Even if they've got talent, they're not going to be as polished. They might not be as fit.
Right.
Their diet might not be as good. All those other things that happen. Australia, obviously, by professionalizing so many women across the country, meant that suddenly your backups are really good. Your backup, and you've got these players who come into Australian women's cricket now who probably 10 years ago wouldn't have even played women's cricket. They're playing because there is a way of earning money there. I talked to Damien Fleming. So Damien Fleming's daughter, I don't know if you know this. I only found this out the other day. Damien Fleming's daughter was the #1 draft pick in the women's Aussie Rules competition. So she went to play football.
I did not.
She also could have played in the women's Big Bash.
Hmm.
Right. And he was saying she had a decision of which sport to choose. She had to, weigh all these things up. Which one does she like better? Which one is she better suited to? Which one will pay her earlier? All those things that proper athletes have to do. And we are now getting to that point in women's cricket where these women are having these choices to make, and we're getting the better athletes come through. Well, the women's 100 was what, 3 years ago now? We're seeing the same thing coming through with the women's sport. And we're also seeing that the 15 to 40th best players are now developing in a way that they weren't under that previous England cricket structure. And so, look, I'm sure if I went through, I'd be able to find some reasons why the Australian team isn't quite as strong. I'm positive I could find that. But I'm not sure that those aren't made by the fact that the England team is slightly stronger. That when these England women go off and play, they're playing against better players now in tougher leagues. They're more professional. Their backups and everything else. Everything is better now, and it's more hungry. I remember I remember this from one of the women was telling me this. That the other problem with the previous setup was once you got your contract, you only had to perform good enough to continue your contract, which meant that you only had to be better than someone who was amateur, right? Whereas now you have to be better than someone who's just taken a bunch of wickets in the 100 and everyone's seen, right? It's a very different marketplace now for the women in England. And I always thought that it was a 3 to 5 year play to get them to catch up to Australia. And it would be the same with India as well. Like a 3 to 5 year period. It seems very quick, this one. And maybe it's just a flare up. Maybe they just had a really good series themselves, as players. And the next few times Australia go off to dominate everyone and they smash England in the face. But I do think that England women's cricket has just risen, whatever that word is, as a whole level. And so I wouldn't be willing to sit here at the moment and just go, oh, the Australian women aren't as good. But I do think I feel pretty confident having watched England and having watched them play a lot over the last 3 or 4 years that they look a lot better than I'm used to seeing them.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. And the fact that England could still go and tie the series, right? 8 points to 8, that's still, on the table and they will be playing for pride. I think that your rationale makes sense. And also, I would argue that this isn't even England's strongest team. I have no clue why they don't play Izzy Wong, because I think she deserves to be in an English shirt. And we've seen how they've unearthed Alice Capsey, right? We all talk about Heather Knight 75 or Kate Cross sticking around at the end in the first ODI. But once again, it was Alice Capsey, 40 of 34, 1 for 37 with the bat. Those are amazing numbers. And she's batting one down. So I think there's lots to look forward to with respect to English women's cricket. And I'm happy to see that, Australia's monopoly at the top is being challenged. But anyway, that's it for the Ashes at least. We'll be taking a small break. Jarrod will push the ad button. You're watching Uncovered with Behram and Jarrod. We'll be back right after the ad.
I know that you think you could run your favourite cricket team better than those who do, but no one is going to let you do that. So why not try Wicket Cricket Manager to satisfy that urge? Pick your nation, pick your league, pick your players, and yell at them when they do poorly. You can find it in the links below or by searching for Wicket Cricket Manager in your app store today.
If you enjoy our content, we ask you to hit the like button, subscribe, or drop a comment along the lines of, "Wow, Jarrod, your vibes are immaculate." Additionally, sharing our work on social media, supporting us in super chats, and helping us out on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee all mean the world to us. Like our stuff? Please support us by whacking that subscribe button like it's a short ball. Or you could just leave a comment expressing your admiration, such as, "Wow, Jarrod, you're the Aubrey Faulkner of YouTubers." Also, please help us spread the word by sharing our work across social media, back us on Patreon, or also support us with live super chats.
Welcome back to Uncovered. You're listening to Jarrod and Behram. So before we even get to the rest of the content, download that game, Wicket Cricket Manager. It's
How are you doing? How are you doing in this game? It's funny how much it's taken over all of our lives.
Also, I made my friend download it and he's doing great. And apparently the trick is to just take unlimited loans because the payment is not that bad.
I just took a loan like a couple of days ago, and I've been thinking about taking. So for those who don't know, we're talking about Wicket Cricket Manager, which is like the old international cricket game, but way updated and everything, and like a football manager game. And it is way tougher than I thought it would be. Usually on these games, it takes me about a week to work it out, and suddenly I've got the best team in the world, and I can't lose a game. This is way tougher, and it's just at that point where it's going to start annoying me now. And I've already noticed that, like, sometimes I'll be out with friends and I'll be looking down and go, I could probably just go through a game here and see how I go, No, but it is good. But the loans. No, I'm glad that this has now become a support group for Wicket Cricket Manager. They're a sponsor, but they're part of our lives.
Yes. Please download it, support us. They help pay our bills, my bills in particular. So please download it. And yeah, it's really fun. I enjoyed it. It's very intuitive. It's simple and it's easy to play. Hard to master, easy to play. Don't forget to take your loans and get that sponsor in which they just give you money regardless of the win or loss. I think that's the proper sponsor.
I did that one too. Yeah.
But it's an absolute annoyance when your players' contracts run out. So keep an eye out for that as well. But anyway, moving forward to India versus the West Indies in the first test at Roseau Dominica. Absolute pounding that West Indies has received at the hands of India in innings and 141 runs. It was like boys against men, really. And there's so much to talk about over here. But let's just start off with the fact that out of 20 West Indian wickets, 17 were taken by India's spinners. And out of those 17 wickets, 12 were taken by Ravichandran Ashwin, who India conveniently did not select for the World Test Championship final. And it was a 5-wicket haul in the first inning, 7 for in the second. He now has 34 5-wicket hauls in Test cricket, the most amongst active cricketers. And I don't know, Jarrod, I personally, when I look at Ravichandran Ashwin and his generation of spin bowlers in Test cricket in particular, Nathan Lyon is the only one who kind of, gives him a run for his money. But I'd say Ashwin is the best. What about you?
I don't think it's close. I think Lyon's main skill over Ashwin is probably his ability to play everywhere. Whereas I still think Ashwin should have played a lot more everywhere, but they don't think that. So we haven't seen enough of it. And so from that perspective, Lyon is there. Jadeja's probably a better all-round player just because of, the fielding and the batting is quite transformative, I think, from that point of view. But if you're just talking spin, I don't, I think if you ask Lyon, Lyon is like Jimmy Anderson without late year career Jimmy Anderson numbers, right? Whereas Ashwin is Steyn. And in fact, Ashwin is like Steyn plus Anderson at a certain point because of the way he plays. But he's so much better than everyone else. And he's still at that point where the physical allows him to do it. So I always think that we never quite got peak Shane Warne when his body could do what it did when he was young and his mind would do when he was older. But for other spinners, we've seen that with Harath is a perfect example. We're now seeing it with Ashwin. I was going to say we saw it with Graham Swan. We probably never quite saw it with Graham Swan as well because of his elbow. But that ability to outthink players, to be 4 or 5, 7D chess. I don't know if 7D chess exists, but it should exist. the way that spinners have to think, but then also still have the ability to rip the ball, right? And put the rotations on the ball and bowl their variations and everything else. Because over time, all these things start to hurt. So I played my second cricket game since I broke my arm recently. And I bowled the first over and I got the leg spin was fine. I had one bounce about 5 times because I was so nervous, but everything else went exactly where it wanted, spun, did everything right. And I was feeling so good, I bowled a wrong. And as I bowled a wrong, and I forgot that it uses different parts of your shoulder, right? And I felt like someone had stabbed me in the side of the arm. Now, I've never had that pain before. I've always felt that the wrong end feels different, but because, I'm still coming back from the arm injury, my shoulder's still not 100%. The point is, as you get older, these sorts of things happen. And Ashwin seems to be at the moment still at that point, even though he's a little bit older, of we don't see any problems with his fingers or his wrists or his elbow or his shoulder. Back is the only thing that I suppose we've had the major thing. You might get some of the lower hamstring, which is kind of back again, related kinds of injuries again. But everything he can do, and he's just completely in control of every micro skill as a spinner. He can move you around the crease. He moves himself around the crease. He knows the right delivery to bowl at any time. He can bowl side spin. He can bowl underspin. He can bowl overspin. He has a ball that goes the other way. Like, he's an absolute master. I don't think that because he was really good in the West Indies here, it means he should have played in the last test in the World Test Championship. I think he should have played in the last test anyway. So, but I don't think you say, well, he took 12 wickets. He should have been in the last test because these are different conditions. It was a different team and everything else. But what I would say is that he's absolutely fantastic. And I think that one of the reasons the West Indies struggle so much against India is they tend to give the venues that spin more the test matches when they play India. They do it against Pakistan as well. And part of the reason is that Australian and English fans tour the West Indies, right? So they're likely to go out to some of those tours. And so they try and give them the better tourist destinations. And so for whatever reason, as a general rule, the touristy places usually seem to favor the fast bowls a little bit more, St. Lucia and Barbados, those sorts of places. And the places that have more spin generally tend to be the places where tourists don't want to go as much. But they're creating this issue with them. They had the Duke's ball. I thought they bowled okay at times, the West Indies. But they create this issue. And you can't... Ashwin was going to be hard if it was a flat pitch. But on that kind of wicket, on day one... I mean, Cornwall bowled brilliantly as well. Didn't get the same amount of wickets. He's not the finish package the way that Ashwin is. He's very much physical bowler with a couple of batting tricks that he has worked in, whereas Ashwin is a complete machine. But you're watching Cornwall be hard to play, and you're just like, well, if the Indians are struggling with some of Cornwall's best balls, how the hell are the West Indians going to handle Ashwin's best balls on this wicket, right? And then you throw in Jadeja as well, and that's what happened. That was the end of the game, right?
Pretty much.
Once they got, I almost tweeted when they're 150 runs in front that they could probably declare and still win by an innings. But I thought that would be unfair on the poor West Indian fans out there.
Yeah, no, it definitely was one of those games. And you're very right to point out that why would you give India spin conducive, conditions? Because their spin has had a feast. And Ravichandran Ashwin has actually also now become the leading 10-wicket haul taker for India. He's tied with Anil Kumble. And again, I am an absolute fan, not just of his skill, but also of him as a spokesperson for the game. I think he always has very interesting things to say. And he's a thorough professional. You won't see him whining about not playing the World Test Championship final. And I think being from the subcontinent, that's a big thing because
he didn't whine.
Some people whine over there.
He didn't whine, but he's mentioned it quite a bit, hasn't he? Like, so that is interesting. He's smart enough not to make it completely obvious where everyone's going to attack him on social media for it. But he's also aggrieved enough to bring it out. Because I felt that he still mentioned it. He's somewhere he's like a high functioning Stuart Broad. Because if Stuart Broad would have done it, we all would have kind of made fun of it, and he would have done it wrong, and that sort of.
Stuart Broad would have just said that, why have I been dropped? And he would have tweeted at the ECB or something. I think he's done that, hasn't he?
He probably has, yeah. But whereas Ashwin did it in a way that you kind of had to read between the lines, which means that it's not a natural headline, right? It's not Ashwin slams selectors or, Ashwin feels, all those. He had the ability to just keep it back, which again, he's a really intelligent player. He seems like a really intelligent person off the field as well. So we're not surprised by any of this, but he is, you see him in conditions like that, and especially with a bunch of left-handers, and you do think, what are these players actually supposed to do? I think it was the ball he got Chandrapal with. Chandrapal was playing quite well. I think this must have been the first innings. He was playing quite well. Hadn't been in for very long, but looked okay. And I reckon I'd seen him face one ball of Ashwin. I was like, well, if he faced 15 more, he's done well here. Like, there are just some days when there's not much you can do. Ashwin with a new ball is, to a left-hander, is so deadly because of the ability to drift the ball, to skid the ball, and then rip the odd one when he needs to. It's just, and that's another reason why Nathan Lyon chugs away and takes wickets, whereas Ashwin is a little bit more like Shane Warne, is a little bit more. He's almost like a combination of Warne and Murali in some ways, in that he has the ability to take a lot of 5-wicket hauls and bowl hugely long spells. Part of that is coming from Asia, which all helps all those things. But he's also a little bit more like Warne in the way that he takes his wickets methodically one by one. Yeah. If you go back and you watch Murali, sometimes Murali was just so much better than everyone else that at a certain point Murali's like, I'm just going to bowl my best ball like 150 times here. Eventually I'll get a wicket. And some days he didn't do that.
Yeah, for context, Murali has 67 5-wicket hauls in Test cricket. That is almost double the number of Ashwin. So that's just paints a picture right there.
I think what we do in cricket, I remember KK from Cricket Info years ago saying this to me. He said, we think Ashwin is better than Jadeja. And part of the reason we think that he's better is because you watch him play and there is a definitive, we can see the genius working out, right? It's like watching a captain. One captain moves the field 100 times and we're like, oh, he's pretty savvy. And the other one's like, no, this is the best field. I'm going to stick with this and eventually we'll get a wicket. And we're like, God, he's so defensive. Why doesn't he move the field? You watch Ashwin. And Ashwin's changing up, the angles, coming up with new things, inventing new methods, trying different things and everything else. And then you watch Murali or Jadeja, and there's a lot more of, my best ball is so good, I'm just going to bowl this best ball for like 150 balls. And at the end of that, I'm probably going to get like 4 wickets, right? And it's a different way of bowling spin. It doesn't mean that Murali didn't have the ability of Ashwin, because obviously quite clearly he did. You wouldn't be able to take that many 5-wicket hauls. And Jadeja is much smarter now than when he was young, and he just had one good delivery and occasionally one would go straight. He's a much better bowler than that now. But Ashwin has always been one of those kinds of bowlers. And if you go back, and I don't know if Roy Belinda or any of the other archivists have ever put up some full spells of Shane Warne, but the key with Shane Warne is the ability to use the crease. So there was a little thing that Shane Warne did that I'd never heard any other bowler talk about before, which was, when he was going to come around the wicket, he wouldn't just come around the wicket next ball. He would bowl one ball from right next to the stumps. Then he would bowl one from the middle between the stumps and the crease. Then he would bowl one from as wide as possible. And then the following ball, he would come wide. Following ball, he'd come around the wicket. So that there's about a 3-meter span between his last 2 balls, right?
Interesting.
You watch Ashwin and he does things like that all the time. Those things, Abdul Qadir did them, Bisham Beatty did them, but Shane Warne took it to a whole different level, in the same way that Ashwin is now taking a lot of those micro skills, and Rashid Khan is taking a lot of those micro skills that some of those bowlers had, and just using them more. And you see more on TV, and you can do things all together. And I think that for me is my favorite thing about Ashwin. There are some times where I'm just like, and I think Shane Warne was slightly better at some days, just going, I'm just going to bowl my best ball for half an hour here. Ashwin almost some days can't do it. There's too much going on in his head. And it's such a fascinating contest to see him sometimes battle his own best skills. We're just like, you have the best off spinner in the world. Just bowl the off spinner for 40 minutes and then miss the batter's mind as much as you want after that. But he can't do it because he knows too much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to point out that he's such a thinking cricketer that to balance out the skill with his wits might be a challenge for Ravi Ashwin. But hey, he's got 12 in this game, 2 more fifers. He's an absolute champion right now. And you'd have to say that even though he has so much to write home about, he wasn't the biggest talking point in this test match. We had much of the same when Rohit scored a ton and Virat scored 70 odd, but Yashasvi Jaiswal on test match debut, in his debut test innings as opener, scored 171 runs of 387 deliveries. Now, I was watching the start of this innings and he was quite flashy at the start. He was going for that aerial cut. He got lucky at the start a bit, but then he started batting time. And even though he played his cut shots beautifully, used that a lot, even the grounded ones versus the spinner, but he brought out his cover drives. He brought out his pull shot. He even reverse swept at one point. but he picked his battles wisely. And
Mm.
this is a complete contrast to what we're seeing in England. This was the anti-Baz ball cricket going on in the West Indies, and a lot of people pointed that out as well. But for me, it's quite refreshing. For me, Yashasvi Jaiswal playing that marathon knock and scoring 171 is just as important for the sport as whatever Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes are doing. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, what I liked about the innings in general was, and I've compared it to when I first saw Joe Root play in Nagpur, and in both cases, they were playing on pitches that, weren't particularly tough. I would say that this pitch wasn't as good as the Nagpur one, which my memory of when India played there, it was as flat as anything. But again, West Indies all their bowlers kept getting injured at various times. They had a bunch of part-timers bowling to him. If he'd faced Raheem Cornwall and Roach had bowled a couple more spells at him, it would have been interesting to see how he would have gone.
He also got lucky, right? He was LBW and they never, I think
that was
or something.
He was already 100 then though?
Yeah, he was 130 odd. Then.
Yeah. No, look, he did have some luck. I think that's also fair. What I liked is what you were talking about before. He came out, and I think you said he was flashy, which he was. He came out like he was on 75 not out.
Yeah.
And I suppose the cricket phrase, which probably comes out of Australia, is batting like a millionaire, right? And he was certainly doing that early on. And then you start to and when Cornwall got on top of him a little bit, he changed his game and he started batting in a particular different style for a little while. And that was the point at which I went, this guy has gears. He has the ability to flip them when he needs to. He still put away the bad balls. So it's not like he didn't do what Ben Stokes would have done. He didn't go all out attack and then all out defense. He was defending a little bit more, but when the loose ball was there, he would hit the boundary. When he thought there was a good matchup, when the part-timers were on, whatever that may have been, if a fast bowler was getting tired, he would go for them. I just thought from beginning to end, it was a very, very skillful innings and a very, very, it was a proper batting innings. And so sometimes you might see, Michael Slater all those years ago, and he's full of energy and he comes out and explodes. We saw Sehwag do something similar. We've seen, young players make 100 when the conditions are in their favor, all these different things. Within this innings, I think we saw a lot of different reasons why he looks like a next level batting talent. And it was the ability to play to the moment at any one stage. It was the unflappability when he was struggling a little bit. It was ramping up, ramping down, the way that he would still attack when he had a defensive mindset, the way that he would still defend when he had an attacking mindset. Everything screamed top level elite batting talent. And I know when he was not out in the first day and everyone was getting really excited, everyone in cricket, and I'll explain the many different reasons why people are getting excited from that. The first one is there's no notable flaw within this game. Right? This isn't Zach Crawley or Matt Renshaw making runs where you're just like, yeah, they're really good, but they probably can't do this other thing, right? Or Ollie Pope, right? And even from what we saw at the moment, there was nothing within that. And let's see what happens when Pat Cummins and Neil Wagner and all these different kinds of bowlers he has to go up against on English wickets. But based on what we saw there, and it was against the Duke's ball, and Kemo Roach is one of the best bowlers in left-handed. I'd say the best seam bowler to left-handers of this generation, probably since Glenn McGrath. I thought that he did everything that he needed to do without me seeing any flaws where I'm like, I'm not sure how this will translate. The other thing is that technically, again, there doesn't seem to be, I mean, when Cameron Green came in, it was straight away, he's a bit front paddy. He's going to have to work this out, right? And if he works this out, he'll average 45 plus. And if he doesn't work this out, he'll average 35 plus. You're not seeing that when you're watching him in bat. And then the other thing is what cricketers look for is time, right? How quickly can you pick the ball up? And he picks the ball up incredibly quickly. And all those things go together. That's why they were excited. And I know when he was 40 not out, people were making fun of Simon Hughes and everything else. And to be honest, Simon Hughes has that relationship with that Rajasthan Royals owner. And, there may have been some ass kissing in his message, but so many people were saying the same thing in cricket. And I was getting so many messages from friends who'd never really seen him, haven't watched the IPL, cricketers and coaches going, is this for real? And he really is an extraordinary talent from that point of view.
I would say he's the best talent I've seen perhaps since after Virat Kohli. Even Kohli of yesteryear when he was young and not as fit and everything. I think Yashasvi Jaiswal has more promise. That free-flowing cut, the flashy one that he started off with, even though maybe, the coaches are going to rein him in, that bring that out a bit later. I love to watch it. It's great. And credit to his coach at Mumbai as well. He migrated to Mumbai from another town and played in those Maidans. I think Amol Mazumdar is his coach, and he'd be really happy, really proud of that innings because he showed a lot of temperament, he showed a lot of skill, and he just seemed like he was ready or born to play Test cricket. I think you described in your piece that he was ready to fly, if I'm not wrong. That's the phrase that you used, and I absolutely agree. He is ready to fly and soar and dominate cricket across formats because this guy looks like the real deal. But he wasn't the only debutant in this game. Let's talk a bit about the West Indies. And I was quite impressed by Alec Athanaze. He is a local boy, of course, Dominican. That's how you say that, right? You don't say Dominican. I don't know.
No,
but anyway,
no.
yeah,
I think
he's
it's
from
Dominican.
there.
Now you've
Yeah,
confused
that's
me.
what I would think as well. Yeah, but he's a local boy playing in front of a home crowd. Top score for West Indies in both innings.
Yeah.
Got 20 odd in the second one, 47 in the first. Also took his maiden Test wicket, which was Rohit Sharma. So that's some fun stuff for him.
A bunch of catches as well, I reckon. I think he got 2 or 3 catches.
He was by and large the most impressive West Indian on show, and which I don't understand. Why wasn't Nkrumah Bonner in this team? Why wasn't Kyle Mayers in this team? Particularly after the success in that Test match at Chattogram, where they chased down that total. I would expect those guys to be on a turning track. But anyway, that's, I guess, a segue. How impressed were you by young Alec?
Yeah, I really like the way he batted. I wonder if against these seam bowlers, he doesn't have quite enough options to score consistently against them. If you're bowling length around off stump, he's basically going to be playing the cover drive for a lot of that period. And teams are probably going to put in 3 slips and, 4 guys in the ring on the offside and just wait for the edge. Against spin, I thought he was really, really interesting. He went aerial. They kept the fielders up. He's obviously a sweeper. He can slog sweep and he can play the conventional. And I think he played the reverse as well, if I think that's right.
I think he did. He slog swept. I think it was Ashwin, maybe, or it was one of the spinners, and that was a crazy slog sweep.
Yeah, well, he played one off Jadeja where he was so in control of it, and he went over square leg's head, which wasn't even a slog sweep. It was more of a. He was just like, I'm going to sweep this in the air because then I'll get a boundary without any problem off it. And yeah, I think it was a slog sweep, perhaps off Ashwin. I liked his play against the spinners a lot more. Which is fine if you're a West Indian cricketer. That's, a lot of your wicket spin, and then you've got Asia. So it's a very, very good skill. I thought he looked very comfortable. Just against the seamers, I thought a little bit crease bound, a little bit. His feet didn't go anywhere.
Right.
And he wants to play the cover drive kind of everything because he knows he can't score off anything else. So pretty much from backward point to mid-off is where he's going to want to score. Team's going to work that out pretty quickly, I think. But I liked his temperament. I love the fact that he lost his contract and it's not like he's playing for a major team. He's playing for the Windward Islands, I think. Lost his contract, had to fight his way back, was an under-19 star. It feels like he's accomplished something. The only thing I would say is he's got 2 first-class hundreds. And one of those was earlier this year. It's the same problem again, where you see the talent, but how is he going to develop? He's at 24. He's going to average between 25 and 35 over the next 3 to 4 years. When he hits his peak, he's going to have a low overall average and he's going to be on the fringes of their team again. And I think that's my biggest issue. They keep doing that. I mean, they play. You said that they didn't pick Nkrumah Bonner and Kyle Mayers, right? And on the face of it, you're just like, well, Kyle Mayers hasn't made a lot of runs since since Bangladesh. He's actually probably been better as a bowler. Nkrumah Bonner, I still think probably one of their best bets in their top order, but obviously incredibly slow. I went through a bit of a form dip and everything else. But they've got a all-rounder batting at number 3. It's exactly the same as Moeen Ali, except for the fact that they didn't even want to bowl him. What's the point of having an all-rounder at number 3 where I think did he bowl like 3 overs in the first 80? Like they weren't even interested in Raymond Reefer's bowling. So if you're going to pick an all-rounder to bat at number 3, at least make sure he can bowl. Like otherwise it's completely pointless. He's got a career first class average of like 28 or 29. It's madness to have him batting at number 3 if you're not going to bowl him. If you're going to bowl him, I'm all in. Let's do it. Let's money ball this if we have to, right? If you're not going to bowl him, pick someone who can bat. Right? Pick someone who we know can make a Test 100. I don't even know if Raymond Reefer might have one first class 100 in his life, and he's not young. Like he's an experienced player. a little bit like Kyle Mayes, he's developed late. And this is the other problem with West Indies, which goes back to Afanaz. Again, is quite clearly Afanaz was an above average talent. He may not make it as a test batter, but quite clearly as a 19-year-old, he was an above average talent. And so many times we see that with the West Indies, and it doesn't seem to, those players seem to go missing, and they don't develop in the same way. And I've always said, I don't know what the problem is over there, because I haven't been involved in the academy system enough to have a look at it. But between the age of 18 and 23, so often you'll see a player at 18 in the West Indies, and you'll be like, whoa. Like, I remember seeing Odean Smith and just like, this is incredible. And at 23, he wasn't that much different than what he was at 18, right? Whereas if you look at, Jaiswal, right? A perfect example of someone where you're just like, there's a big difference between him at 18 and 23. Cameron Green, 18 and 23. Well, he's not even 23 yet, is he? But he won't even be the same human by the time he gets to 23. It seems like other countries are really good at developing that talent. West Indies can make the talent, but they don't develop. And you almost have to develop on your own. That's very hard to do in what is it's a professional cricket setup, but it's not professional compared to the major teams. And I do worry about that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that everyone should be worried about. And on that same note, I'm just going to bring this one final thing up before we end this segment. I don't know if you caught that tweet or not, but Vikrant Gupta, a very notable Indian broadcaster / journalist, suggested that the West Indies should be disbanded into each of those, individual island nations, and they should be made associate cricket nations, and then they might have the motivation to play for their country. Now, I find this absurd for several reasons. One, that the West Indies carries a lot of prestige with it in Test cricket, and because they have that, they could potentially bounce back someday. And also, if you're disbanding the West Indies, what about limited overs cricket? Sure, they're having a rough patch right now, but they won the T20 World Cup in 2016, right? So I don't know what to make of it. And a lot of people were quite critical of this. So I just want to know your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea that they'll be better cricketers if they play for their country is so stupid. It hurts me on an intellectual level when someone says that. Oh yeah, we're gonna separate the West Indies, and that guy who's averaging 32 in his first class system, he's now going to average 45 in Test cricket, is he? Because he's got Barbados on his shirt instead of the West Indies. It's just bullshit, right? And it's old-fashioned nonsense bullshit. Also, the other thing is, if you do disband this team, right, you have to admit that the Afanaz, we're never going to see him again. Where are we ever going to see him again? We've just seen a good young cricketer. Well, who's he going to fucking play for? Dominica? Where would Dominica be in the world rankings? So me and Michelle did this maybe a year or two back. Well, we had a look at it. We're like, most of these teams wouldn't be ranked in the top 12 in the world. And the ones who would, maybe Barbados, Trini, Jamaica, when they're doing well, they might be between, let's say, 10 and 15, right? More often than not, all the rest of the teams are not even going to be in the top 20. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, they're playing for their team now. I don't remember at the Commonwealth Games, the West Indians doing so much better because they played for their nation. Did the West Indian women win the Commonwealth Games gold medal, Behram? You'll have to go and Google that one. But I don't think they did. Yeah. I think they beat a team lost to teams that were better than them because other teams were better than them. So from that perspective, it doesn't make any sense. The other one is that, we talk about this like it's the only time in cricket that it's happened. Obviously, there's the England and Wales cricket board, right? And then there's the Irish team, which is Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. Is it actually as unique in cricket as we think it is? There are issues with the fact that it's very hard to get government funding for cricket in the West Indies, because why would Trinidad spend millions and millions of dollars on their cricketers when the vast majority of them are going to play for the West Indies, which doesn't really promote Trinidad directly, or they're going to go off and play franchise cricket. I do actually understand that. But I also understand that what's Trinidad's best bet? It'd be about the 10th or 11th best team in white ball cricket, maybe get to 8th or 9th. They're not going to win a World Cup as Trinidad. And I say that as no one respects Trinidad T20 cricket more than I do, but I can't see how they would ever win a World Cup, right? Maybe they have a tournament where they make the semifinals, but I would doubt that. Maybe they make the second round of some of those tournaments. That's a far more realistic goal. The rest of the islands just cease to exist. Forget Darren Sammy, gone. Yeah. Right? St. Lucia would barely have a team under this situation. And it's always said when they're losing, but when they're winning, right? So when they had that couple of years where they started to win Test matches, so 2016.
Last year, they defeated England in a Test series last year.
right?
So
Last year. They've won it. They've won. Their men and their women have won an ICC tournament sooner than the Indian women and the Indian men have. They played some really good Test cricket over a period of about 2 or 3 years. Did they draw a series in UAE against Pakistan? They won a Test match,
but they won a Test match.
They won a Test
against
match in
Misbah's
UAE.
team.
Yep, against a very strong team. You know, they're not great and they can't bat. Their bowling's pretty good. Their bowling keeps them in some Test matches from time to time, but they're not a great team. And I don't see how them all going off on their own is going to make them a better team. Having said that, I think the other argument would be that I'm not sure they're going to get any better as the West Indies than they currently are either. Now, who knows? Professionalism and, you know, a bunch of West Indians looking towards what Chris Gayle and Andre Russell have done and been like, okay, well, let's not go into sprinting. Let's not go into boxing. Let's not go into basketball, right? Or football. Let's actually try cricket because there's a lot of money here. Perfectly reasonable thing to believe that those sorts of things might happen. I mean, we haven't seen the children of 2016 yet, right? That's going to be in the next 5 to 6 years. We'll start to see those sorts of players come through. All those things are very, very possible, and we have another upturn. I find it hard to. I think all the times West Indies cricket was ever successful, it was successful because of external factors, right? And because of that, it means that they've never actually learned how to develop their own cricket to be great. And that is a tough thing. And I don't know how they ever overcome that, if we're being honest. But on 2 different occasions, they've been the best at Test cricket and the best at T20 cricket. Plus, they had the one-day cricket for a long time as well. It seems weird to me that every time they play a bad Test or they get kicked out of a tournament, they need to be, disbanded. And then when they play good again, no one ever says, actually, this is the reason we should keep them together. Like, you can't have one without the other.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think a lot of people were quite critical of that. Plus, I don't know much about this, but personally, I feel that already they have issues with the West Indies board not being able to offer them a lot of money through the contracts. I don't see that situation getting better if you're going to break those countries up. Like Jamaica or Barbados individually will never be able to satisfy the pockets of cricketers who are earning a fair bit in T20 franchise cricket. But anyway, that's it for this segment. We'll have another ad and we'll be back with some Asian cricket. Pakistan versus Sri Lanka and Afghanistan versus Bangladesh.
A few years ago, I had a panic attack after ESPN Cricinfo made me their global writer. I'd earned that position, but I also felt like a fraud at the time because I didn't really understand how I wrote. I understand that there was a process and gears and different styles and things, but how it all came together felt a little bit random. And so I began to panic like a golfer with a natural swing, worried one day I'd just end up with the yips. And would my career be over? So I took my writing apart piece by piece until I understood it. And then I figured out I could teach others all the mistakes I had learned. So I started an online course where I tried to make it as cheap as possible so people like me would be able to afford it. It's called Fans with Laptops, and heaps of people from around the world have used it so far, from first-time writers all the way through to professionals trying to improve. I started with a simple plan to make each writer the best they could be. And from the feedback I've received over the years, it seems like the course does that. But after COVID, my career changed. I came to YouTube, started podcasts, wrote emails, and formed a new career on my own going forward. So I now had something else to offer, the multimedia side of things, social media and everything else. Not to mention that I was building everything up as an independent. And so I added all of that to my course. So if you have ever wanted to work in sports as a writer or podcaster or making videos or anything else, Fans with Laptops is the place to start. If you think you qualify as a fan and you have a laptop and you want to work in sport, click on the link.
Welcome back to Uncovered. This is Behram and I'm with Jarrod Kimber. And if anyone is interested in taking that course, I'm personally taking Fans with Laptops and I'm like 15% through. Take it if you have aspirations within the cricketing world to maybe become a writer or a vlogger or one of those things. It's a very, very good course to take. Anyway, let's move to Pakistan versus Sri Lanka. We are 2 days in at the Galle Test, which is the first test of the series. And I'll give you a quick briefing about it. Shaheen Shafridi's back. He took wickets with the new ball, got a 3 first. Sri Lanka were on the back foot, 54 odd, 54 for 4, I believe. That's when Angelo Matthews and Dhananjaya De Silva started playing well. Matthews fell for around 64. Dhananjaya went on to make 122 runs. And he has this penchant for scoring big runs versus Pakistan. He always does this. He scored his 10th 150 test matches. 3 of them have come versus Pakistan. Really good, free-flowing, counter-attacking innings. He is the reason Sri Lanka ultimately got to 312. including a 29-run partnership for the final wicket. Shaheen took 3, Naseem took 3, Abrar took 3, and there was Salman Ali Agha with the solitary wicket. Now, you've seen enough Test cricket in Gaul. Do you think that 312 is a big enough score, particularly because Pakistan are 221 for 5, and we'll get to that later, but just on the first inning score?
No, I saw the end of day one, and I was watching a bit of it then, and they lost a wicket right on stumps, didn't they?
Yeah.
So were they
Final ball.
were they 4 down? No, they were 5 down maybe at that point.
They
weren't
were
And that
6
made them
down after that wicket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought they'd probably just lost a couple of extra wickets that cost them a chance of really pushing ahead. So, I mean, Pakistan could end up being par, right? And then it's a bit of a shootout. I think if it's par, and Pakistan could still go past them, of course. Shakil's still out there, isn't he? So I think that from Pakistan's point of view, you probably have to be plus 50 just to give yourself that buffer if, if Sri Lanka can make 250 or whatever that may be, that it's within 200 and you give yourself a chance of, slogging a couple in the chase if you, to be able to reach it. But you prefer not to give a first innings deficit. You prefer to be as far ahead as possible if you're the team batting second at Gaul, because it does obviously fall apart. It's only going to help the spinners more and more as the game goes on. So Pakistan really have to be aiming for 400 to 420.
Right.
And anything less than, 350. And I think Sri Lanka is massively in front. So it's not a great score from Sri Lanka, but it's enough, especially to put some pressure on. But it really depends. I'm just having I'm trying to have a look at their tail. So they got Noman Ali, Abra, Shaheen Afridi coming in. So, they've got a little bit of batting there, but one quick wicket at the start tomorrow, and Pakistan are under a lot of pressure. You certainly don't want to go in with a deficit at Gaul, just because even if you roll Sri Lanka out for 180, if it's 230 you're chasing, it's very, very tricky. So they have to make sure that they bat for as long as possible, Pakistan, from here. And it usually just gets tougher to bat on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you bring up that wicket off the final ball. Imam-ul-Haq took a splendid catch, and Pakistan's catching in general has been really good in this innings. I think they pretty much caught on to everything that came their way, barring that one chance at short leg, which was like half a chance. So that's a big reason why they still find themselves in this test, because as he has done so in the recent past so often, Prabha Suria, the left-arm orthodox spinner, once again wreaked havoc in Gaul. He got Babar, he got Abdullah, he got Sarfaraz. Now, Pakistan did throw a few wickets here and there, and Sean Massoud once again off to a brilliant start. Pakistan were Baz bowling, by the way. I don't know if you know about that, but they're
going at like 5 and over or something silly, aren't they? So what is that?
5 and over.
Is that on purpose, or was just Sri Lanka bowling weirdly, or how did that happen?
So they had started off with that sort of intent versus the fast bowlers. I think Imam-ul-Haq also got out, playing a flashy drive, and you could say that he threw that wicket away. But they've mentioned this in their recent PCB podcast, that they're going to try and play the Pakistan way, which is supposedly an aggressive brand of cricket and more attacking and win-driven. But they've been pretty vague about it. Now, I thought they were playing as per the situation. They were cashing in on the fast bowlers. And when Prabha Jayasuriya did get on top of them, the way Saud Shakil and Salman Ali Agha counter-attacked, Saud with his sweeps, and then both of them used their feet really, really well, came down the track and unsettled Prabha Jayasuriya's length. And I think that is key. You can't let Prabha Jayasuriya settle on a Gaul wicket. You're asking for trouble if you're doing that. So Pakistan was 101 for 5, right? They went on to post 221 for 5 at stumps, and unfortunately, rain played spoil sport. But they're both in their 60s, Saud and Salman. They've both looked really good for Pakistan in the recent past. Saud Shakil in 11 innings now in Test cricket has crossed 57 times. He has a ton in there as well. And Salman Ali Agha is a very, very good player of spin who also is handy with the ball. So I think it's this pair that things largely rely on, because if they can play out the first session tomorrow, or even half of the first session tomorrow, I think Pakistan are in business. But
they keep batting at this rate. It's 5 runs and over. Like, that's might be 50 or 60 runs. One other thing I would say is I've just seen this. Sean Massoud made 39 off 30. If you've been in a coma for the last 7 years and you woke up and you suddenly had a look at Sean Massoud being 39 off 30, you probably knock yourself back out again and think that you've gone into a different dimension.
Yeah, this is Sean Massoud 4.0. We saw it in the tour game. He scored 83 off 67 odd, and he keeps reinventing himself. But I think Daniel Rasool said this in an article. I know he said it. I've quoted it 10,000 times. This is the 10,001st time that he keeps hitting this glass ceiling after looking like $1 million.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that Sean Massoud can get over that barrier because he's a talented cricketer. He played some glorious shots today. Some of those were like really, really easy on the eye. He is always easy on the eye. So for
Mm.
Pakistan's sake, I hope he can make it work at number 3.
So
But
here's
overall,
what I would say is
hmm,
I think that he's limited, right?
hmm,
But because he's so smart and because he has the financial resources to be able to go out and try all these
hmm,
different things with a parachute behind him if it all goes wrong,
hmm,
he has the ability to basically to keep rebranding himself. So every time he comes back to Test cricket, everything you knew about him from the last time is no longer apt. And
hmm,
so many teams, of course, are going to go on past analytics or just past memories of how they used to get him out. And his
yeah,
ability to keep changing and everything else is actually quite handy. But the reason he probably has that glass ceiling is because eventually there's a reason he is limited, right? There is
hmm,
literally a ceiling to his talent. And once you've seen him do it for 12 test matches, you probably have like, oh, okay, we just bowl to him this way now, right? But it's
hmm.
fascinating. And who knows how long he can do it. You know, I'm so interested in everything he does because his ability to, if you would have told me now that he would actually even be playing Test cricket at this point, let alone scoring it better than run a ball, I would have punched you in the face.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is on his last sort of chance because he's played what close to 30 tests now. He's on in playing his 29th test, and he doesn't average 30. He averages under 30, having played the bulk of his cricket in Asia, right? So those aren't flattering numbers. But I just want to talk to you about two things, and then we'll move on to Afghanistan, Bangladesh. One is, of course, we've always talked about how Pakistan's attack looks toothless
Mhm.
without Shaheen Shah Afridi. And when him and Naseem are appearing in
Yeah.
Test cricket, that's when Pakistan looks at its best. Even on a surface like Gaul, they've managed to have or take 6 wickets between them. But have you seen Abrar Ahmed at all? Because he's a very unique kind of leg spinner. Now, you're a leg spinner. He doesn't rely on his wrists primarily to add revolutions on the ball. He's like the reverse Mendes. He uses his fingers to add revolutions to the ball as a leg spinner. So, how much of you have you caught? And also, some thoughts on Saud Shakil.
Yeah, look, I've seen a little bit of him bowl. I haven't. I a bunch of Pakistani fans. I think might have been. Did he play against New Zealand or England?
He played against both.
Yeah. So I think one of those series, people were saying I needed a big deep dive, but I didn't have the chance to be able to go through it.
Mm.
He actually reminds me a little bit of Chris Harris. Now, are you old enough to know who I'm talking
Yeah, of
about?
course, I've
Yeah,
seen Chris
you
Harris.
look old enough. But Chris Harris kind of bowled leg cutters rather than leg
Hmm.
spin. And I often, as a leg spinner, would kind of bowl halfway between leg cutters and leg spin, just because it helped. I always felt I could drift the ball more bowling leg cutters,
Hmm.
weirdly enough, and I could get the ball through a little bit quicker. And I wasn't powerful enough to be able to do that. Abrad's a little bit different in the way that he does it, but it does sort of look to me like there is a combination of leg spin and leg cutting. And so you'll hear that the term roller bowler.
Hmm.
They used to say that about some spinners. It's not as on trend these days to use that, but it used to be what they would call to certain leg spinners. You know, basically he just rolls the ball out rather than ripping the ball out. My worry for those sorts of guys is always what happens when you're not in Asia,
Hmm.
right? You know, it's the Ajanta Mendes
Right.
argument, right? Which is if Ajanta Mendes can move the ball this much in Asia, and for those listening to the podcast, I'm doing about 1.8 inches.
Hmm.
If you could spin the ball 1.8 inches in Asia, how much are you going to spin it when you're on a flat pitch somewhere else?
Hmm.
Probably nothing, right?
Hmm.
And that's always the issue I have with those kinds of bowls. So I'd love to see him more as he moves in different conditions, but I think he's really good. And yeah, I think with Shaquille, look, he's sort of doing what, I don't know, Boland and Jameson and Akshar Patel. You know, it seems like every 3 months we have a new debutant who comes in with a ridiculous average.
Hmm.
Look, he's very, very talented. I want to see these players in, you know, multiple different situations, the same that you
Hmm.
wanted for Boland and Jameson and Akshar, to really get a good idea. But in these sorts of conditions, I think he's a very, very interesting player, and you know, certainly is a important person to have in the Pakistan team.
Yeah, there are two players, both of those guys, Abrar and Saud Shakil, that a lot of people have pinned their hopes on because Pakistan's spin bowling resources, there's a dearth over there. There are not a lot of
Yeah.
spinners coming out in the country. So Abrar is like the only hope pretty much over there. Maybe Osama Mir to a certain extent. And then South Shakil is compact, plays the ball late, looks technically very solid. So yeah, Pakistan fans are really expecting big things. But anyway, we're going to move towards Bangladesh versus Afghanistan. I'm going to keep this super short. I'm going to give you a quick briefing on what went down.
Please.
So Nabi got a 50 in the first T20, but it was outdone by Tawheed Ridoy. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right.
Yeah, I don't know his first name. I don't know if I've written it down, but Ridoy is definitely his surname. Yeah.
Yeah, Tawheed Ridoy. He got 47 of 30 odd deliveries and looks the part, really. He's done well for Bangladesh in ODI cricket as well. I expect to see him in the ODI World Cup. I think he definitely slots into that middle order. And then the second was pretty much Bangladesh doing Bangladesh best, right? Bowling the team out or restricting them to under 120. Shakib pretty much had an MVP performance, took 2 wickets, scored like a quick fire, unbeaten 18. So let's just talk about Tawheed Ridoy before we end this episode. How much have you seen? And
I've seen quite a bit. I commentated on him versus England, and I've kept an eye on him ever since. I think me and Mohammed Issam might have done a podcast where we talk about Ridoy as well. Look, he's just a talent. It's quite noticeable that he hasn't come through in the same way that many. I'm trying to think. What's the name of the other Pakistani? Who are we on now? Bangladesh. What's the name of the other Bangladeshi batter who made no runs forever and I'm now obsessed with?
Shanto. Nazmul Hussain Shanto.
So Shanto is the sort of player that you see quite a bit in Bangladesh cricket, who has talent, but they come through. And I don't know the best way of putting it, but they kind of bat like they're using a wet wipe. Right? Like it's almost like they have no power at all. And even when they play a nice cover drive, it's like watching an under 16 player. And you're just like, oof. He's just played the best shot of his life. And literally cover is lent down to pick up a ball that's trickling towards them. Ridoy, for me, I think that the thing that I thought was that he had legitimate power that we don't see a lot in Bangladeshi players coming through. But also, on top of that, he played with a freedom that, again, myself and Isham have talked about this a lot, that Bangladeshi batters sort of come through this natural sort of pessimism. It's partly it's to do with it's a bit like England players of old, where if all the wickets you play on literally don't bounce above your knee and you have to worry about being LBW every ball, you don't have the same kind of freedom. There's a reason why India and Australia probably have produced consistently some of the best batters on earth. And it's because you can trust the bounce on those wickets, at least for the first few days, trust the bounce on those wickets and you play through the line. You come through, and that's the same at club cricket. In Australia and South Africa is probably another one. In Pakistan, I keep saying Pakistan. In Bangladesh, Pakistan, the segment is over. Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, the pitches are even worse at club level, right? Like the facilities are not good. The training facilities are not good. And that the players that come out of it look like they've been playing on shitty wickets, right? You look at Ridoy, he looks like he's got a concrete wicket with AstroTurf in his backyard. Like he's playing like, there's a freedom to the way that he plays. And for me, it's really exciting, but he's also very talented. We haven't seen him play a test match yet. And I know he's got an okay first-class record, but he's averaging, I don't know, he's probably played about 10 ODIs. He's averaging 45 to 50 in those. T20 cricket, he's probably got a strike rate of 135 to 140 as well. I think he can push. I think he can push all those numbers up. I really do like the way he plays. I like the way he goes about it. I'm very, very excited for him. And I think if they don't pick him for the World Cup, then I will personally, protest.
No, we'll go meet the Prime Minister. That's what we'll do.
That's what we'll do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you do in Bangladesh. You go and talk to the Prime Minister. So that's
and then we'll get Ridoy a holiday, and then he can play in the World Cup.
Yeah, but anyway, just to sum things up, Bangladesh won 2-0, and keep an eye out for Tawheed Ridoy. Both Jarrod and I have endorsed him as someone who might do well for Bangladesh. That's it for this Uncovered podcast. We've obviously gone way over time because there was so much to talk about. But thank you for tuning in. That's it from myself, Behram. You can find me at Def Mango on Twitter. And of course, Jarrod needs no introduction, so you can find him everywhere. That's all for now. Goodbye.
I'm a test guy, but I understand I live in a T20 world. So I'm still going to chat for hours about the inner workings of wrist positions or make long-form documentaries on Kiwi openers. But I also have to work out how to make that work for the T20 society we live in. Well, actually, I don't do that. That is what Memento does. Its artificial intelligence takes my test-length videos and podcasts and turns them into death hitting in T20. Short, sharp, wearing matching outfits. If you make content and you want to slice it up into individual innings, get Memento.